John Whittle rarely does, though. He's been working hard as he always does. Happy New Year, John. We're going to run the gamut with you today. How you doing, brother?
Doing wonderful. It's great to be back on and see you guys again.
I mean, look at your hat. What does your hat
You
say?
too, John. Yeah, what is
That's
that?
nice. I've seen it before, but
That okay?
I love it, dude. I love it.
Great hats.
I'm rocking the company beanie today because my head's cold. It's 11 degrees here today.
Yeah.
Before we get into this, Clint, I think you're right generally sometimes, but it's not like Lenore Sellers signed an NIL deal and then he got a wire into his bank account for this gigantic amount of money and then went and played the Citrus Bowl. Most of these contracts are for next season anyway.
Yeah, they're backloaded.
So it's the fact that he got paid now he's a bigger no. There's other things that went into that we'll probably discuss, but that's money had nothing to do with it. Now that's insulting to him, I think.
Yeah,
Well, guess what?
coincidence. It's not causality.
Yeah, these guys are getting paid a pretty good amount for college players, but their money comes in the NFL.
There you
Why
go.
why are they trying to play shitty right now?
That's right, John.
Why would they lose motivation? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. You took words out of my mouth. You know, when you're a star quarterback, especially maybe a first round type star quarterback, you can get $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is in college. It won't compare to that first round check. That's for sure. Yeah, John, let's start with football and then we'll get our way into basketball and baseball. Certainly a frustrating ball game to end the season on, but it's not, I don't think, going to derail the hype in the offseason. Give us since we haven't talked to you, we'll broad stroke this sucker. Give us your synopsis of the Citrus Bowl.
I mean, frustrating game to watch. I mean, it was early on where you saw that they weren't going to call holding, and South Carolina's got to do better as an offensive line to just hold everybody. Of course, Illinois wasn't really rushing anybody, but it was clear that they weren't going to call holding at all. TJ Sanders and Dylan Stewart were tackled on almost back-to-back plays. It just frustrating, but what was even more frustrating was watching the Illinois substitution pattern. I heard you guys for a few minutes touching on that. We were sitting right beside a couple of Illinois guys, and I asked him, I said, have y'all done this the whole year? And he said, yeah, this is what they do. And he said it'd probably be just as bad, if not worse, this game because it's a redshirt freshman quarterback. And I get it. The helmet communication turns off at 15 seconds. And he said, if you substitute after that 15-second mark, you're not given an opportunity for the coach to be in Lenore Sellers' ear to, talk through one last look on the play. And, it makes sense, but it's infuriating. And, I do think that it's a really frustrating deal to have to deal with. At the same time, South Carolina didn't look like they prepared for anything like that to happen. And if it's something Illinois has been doing all year, they should have been prepared for it. And they certainly didn't make any adjustments to it either. So, a lot of culpability goes to South Carolina as well for not being prepared for it as they should have and not trying to make some adjustments, whether it's going up tempo or just getting plays in quicker. And maybe that was a function of having a new offensive coordinator and what have you. And, just part of it. But, South Carolina certainly did not do a very good job in handling it and dealing with it.
That's a very well stated opinion there, John, because, I talked about that as it was happening in real time as well. Don't substitute. Don't substitute. It's easier said than done, but don't sub them in. Go to the quick game. They played cover 2, cover 3 all day. Certainly threw a curveball at South Carolina. Don't sub. You want to play the game, make that adjustment at halftime. I didn't think they made it either.
They played them almost identically to Ole Miss, which was smart, and Old Dominion, and Kentucky. I mean, there's plenty of teams that do that. I don't know about the substitution pattern thing. That was something that maybe, film study, they probably should have picked up on it and had a plan. Like you said, I think when you have a player like Josh Simon out there at tight end and you have some kind of versatile guys, I mean, you can spread them out, move them in, and not sub.
Yeah. And I think too, to move the conversation along into something a lot of people want to talk about, John, it felt to me like Lenore Sellers was a redshirt freshman who hadn't played football in 30 days. That's what it felt like to me. Like, I don't think there's anything else to look into. I know people have a narrative, this, that, and the other. To me, it looked like he was a redshirt freshman who hadn't played in the game in 30 days. There were multiple opportunities to maybe take off and go. And everybody circles this Simon play at the end. But, John, you sat right there. You saw the same thing I did. There were multiple balls that he threw down the field, guys who were wide open and just flat out airmailed it. If he hits on 2 of those are runaways for touchdowns for South Carolina. And he's been hitting them all year. I thought he just looked off. He just had he looked off.
Everybody has it. And I'll add this too before John responds. The Delvon Campbell ball, Delvon had to slow down and get it.
Yeah.
I don't know why Delvon falls down like he does, but that's okay. That's okay. You know, he just kind of fell down, but he had to, he was wide open and then slowed down and caught it. And so, look, Lenoris is going to be off some days. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I agree. He was just a little bit off. And, you know, I posted some thoughts at halftime in that game, just saying, speaking a lot about Lenoris, but about the team in general, so much of that performance was just a little bit off. And you clean some things up at halftime and you know, get back on it and you're okay. But everything was off just a little bit all game. And you know, that could be said with Lenoris. I mean, he had a couple of drops too, and that didn't help, but he was just a little bit late, a little bit high, a little bit something, and it just wasn't quite there. And you know what that reason was, whether he just was uncomfortable, whether Illinois was doing some things differently, whether it was, you know, a new coordinator in the communication. I think it's probably a mixture of all of it. You know, I sat in the Illinois press conference after South Carolina went to hear what Bielema had to say about the exchange between him and Shane. And one of the players up there for Illinois, whose name escapes me right off the top of my head, but he talked about how they changed their defense a pretty good bit from what they have been doing a lot of the season to give him more opportunities to kind of rove and make plays, and that's what he did. So, you know, I think there was a lot that went into it that Lenoris just wasn't quite right. And, you know, sometimes that happens when you're that young, and sometimes that happens in general, but you know, it's a lot more difficult to overcome, you know, when you haven't been in a whole lot of situations before. So, you know, he's still a young guy for the most part, and you know, he'll learn and get better from it.
And here's the good news: he usually goes through things once, and as long as he just keeps playing, he shakes it off and he's fine. First time he's had a 30-day layoff, and then gone and had to play a game. And I'm not saying either that, and people are going to be like, well, this is coaching and this shouldn't have happened, but there is an emphasis on him staying in the pocket more. I mean, that's something when you evaluate him as a quarterback, he's going to have to start doing better when you look at the totality of the season and his performance in the passing game. And sometimes with young players, it almost goes, John, I think, to an extreme where if they're not used to it, there's been a layoff, they're a little rusty, they're not playing with the confidence they played, you're almost hesitant to take off. Because it's like, well, no, I got to stay here and take the 5-yard check down or whatever, when there's a bunch of green grass in front of you. And against Clemson, he just took off and went. So, you know, we'll see. But I think that's something too. Yeah. Yeah.
To your point. And that's one of the Illinois guys were talking a fair amount the whole game. And he looked at me towards the end of the first half and said, why isn't he running?
Yeah.
And I said, it's a great question that I just don't have the answer to. And there were many times that he had an opportunity to go and get some yards and just didn't. And, you know, but like you said, it's part of it. And, you know, Mike Shula at his first press conference said, you know, we're going to have to be a little bit more cognizant of sometimes there's wide receivers open and times you need to get rid of the football. And, you know, it did seem like he was a little bit paralyzed by that at times too. So, you know, there, like I said, there's a lot that went into it, and you know, it just didn't add up to being a great day for Sellers or South Carolina.
John Whittle with the Big Spur, 11:37 here on Inside the Gamecocks the show. Yeah, it looked like he was processing a lot, and had, you know, maybe he taken off a time or two here and there, could have changed the ball game. But you know, that's what I've been asked this multiple times, John. I don't think any of us have any real proof to a response on this necessarily, but you know, do you think that just because there was a change, right? Well, there's a change, and Mike Shula's the OC, and do you think he coached him not to run? I don't think that at all, just using simple logic and common sense. I don't think they're going to spend a week and a half or 2 weeks in December before they play a bowl game trying to make wholesale changes to a quarterback who finally hit his groove halfway through the season and got them to this point. If they want to make those changes, that's what the spring is for. You know, I'm not so sure that they spend any time basically trying to coach him to not run or do this or do that or whatever. I think they just wanted Lenore Sellers to be Lenore Sellers. And like you said, he just happened to be a little bit off.
It's up to him too, JB. I mean, you know, against Clemson, they didn't coach him to run those plays.
Right. Yeah.
There's not a play in the playbook that says go back there, bend in half like Gumby, twirl around like a ballerina, take off using your 4.5 speed for a 60-yard gain.
Yeah.
The play doesn't exist. It's up to him. And I think too, with the emphasis on that, you know, sometimes young players that they overcorrect.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you say so, John?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. I think that's absolutely true. I'm not sure that I would put Lenore Sellers and ballerina in the same sentence.
He's graceful though, like a ballerina. Grace. It's the grace.
Gymnast.
Gumby was nice. Ballerina. Can you see him out there?
Yeah, I don't know many 6'3.5", 242-pound ballerinas.
No.
But your point is exactly right. And you know, we talked about that. You know, you remember we talked a little bit about that early in the season when he was having all those fumble problems, and you know, he was trying to create too much, maybe at times, and losing sight of the fact that, you know, he's got to hold on to the football too. And you know, it was talk about finding the right balance of creating plays, protecting the football, making something happen, but you know, being cognizant that, hey, there's a bunch of big dudes trying to tackle you and take that football too. So, you know, sometimes, like you said, things get overcorrected, and, you know, it's finding the right balance, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Lenore's is too good.
I think hitting the sweet spot with him is Mike Shula's biggest challenge this offseason. By the way, the play calling to me was fine because, like Jamie said, guys running wide open. I like the two-back thing they did. They had a lead blocker in the backfield. Yeah. Was that Maurice? That was Maurice Brown, right?
Mo Brown was back there, 44. Yeah.
It's hard for me to see when I'm watching it not at home.
Yeah, I thought he called it. I mean, I don't want to go say he called a great game because I don't know all the play calls and this, that, and the other. That's not for me to decide. But I didn't think I thought Mike Shula called a fine game. I mean, had they just executed where they needed to execute, they win the game.
Yeah, dude. I thought he took shots good and all that. And all that will get more cohesive.
And one thing that Shane pointed out that, you know, I don't think has really been mentioned enough and goes to maybe a part of the disjointedness of and the lateness of some of the play calling and substitutions too. I mean, South Carolina lost 2 offensive analysts as well, in addition to Dowell Loggins. So the whole mechanics of everything changes from up in the booth. Plus, you got Mike calling plays from the sidelines, and he said you can't see as much from down there. You have to rely on the people who are up in the booth to give you good and accurate information. And you got 2 new guys up there who are doing different things for the first time. So, you know, it all goes hand in hand. And that's one reason, like, I don't think folks should have their panties in a wad when they try to, you know, discern what's good and bad about that bowl game and, you know, trying to equate it to what's going to happen next year. Well, now the playbook's out on the North Sellers. Everybody knows how to stop them. Come on.
Good luck.
We got 9 months until they play another game.
Good luck, Virginia. Okay, Virginia Tech.
Everybody's going to get better. The coaches, the players, everybody. Come on.
Ask Alabama about bowl games or Texas A&M or I mean, dude, look, we've seen this before. It's not. All right, I'll tell you a little story. 1998, Michigan State won 10 games. Nick Saban hightailed it to LSU. His entire staff, including Brad Lawing, State in East Lansing. Bobby Williams takes over as the interim coach. They played the mighty Florida Gators in the Citrus Bowl with one Stephen Orr Spurrier dialing him up. Good Gator team. Lost. Florida lost to a Michigan State team with Bobby freaking Williams as their head coach. And the program immediately went into the tank, and Florida kept on winning. So it doesn't, I mean, UConn didn't go on to great heights, although I do think they went to the Fiesta Bowl the next year after they beat South Carolina in the Pizza Bowl, right? South Carolina's program did not fall apart. They won the East the next season. It's not indicative of anything.
I remember that Pizza Bowl, and there was a player event that was at a comedy club, and they had this big Italian spread for everybody to go through buffet style. And at the end, Shane Beamer was one of the last people to go through it. And I'm there taking photos of the event, and he looks at me and says, "How did they run out of pizza? We're at the Papa John's Bowl."
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer was, but I remember Shane being very, very sad and disappointed that there was no more Papa John's pizza left for him at the end of that buffet.
They ran out in the stadium that game too.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a bizarre setup that whole, and it was one whole degree outside. At least it felt that way in beautiful Birmingham, Alabama.
Miserable. I wasn't there. I was actually in Tampa for the Under Armour game, but I covered that Under Armour game for ESPN, and then in the press box, I'm writing with my buddy Jerry Hamilton, and I watched the whole thing unfold at the press box at Tropicana Field. And you can ask Jerry Hamilton. I was not happy the entire ride back to Orlando after that. That was a bad car ride. He still talks about that.
Well,
that and the rankings meeting we had at the Perkins where Tiger Woods used to meet his mistress. That was another story. Nice. Orlando story with me and Jerry.
Oh, God.
Back in the 24/7 days.
Well, on that note though, John, it does, we mentioned earlier, Staples has his way too early stuff. I don't look into any of those things, but what it is indicative of is that, there will be off-season hype for South Carolina, not because of the performance in the bowl game, but because they have star players, including a star quarterback, and they won 9 games this year in the SEC. So for the first time as a head coach, Shane Beamer is going to have to deal, let's call it like 5 or 6 months. Things will quiet down for a little bit, but then you'll start getting the spring stuff. 5 or 6 months worth of high praise for his football program. And a lot of that, of course, will center around the quarterback, Lenore Sellers, right? So I hope they're ready for that moment, because August 31st will be here before you know it. And a lot of the country is going to be talking about the Gamecocks probably somewhere inside the top 20 as they enter next season.
Yeah, and I don't want to make this all 40 minutes about Lenore Sellers, but when you have a quarterback like him, then you typically get that kind of hype. I mean, look at the teams who are receiving the praise right now. Those teams, for the most part, have really good quarterbacks, and South Carolina's up there in large part because of Lenore's. And it feels like there's momentum on South Carolina's side because in large part of that, but because of also what South Carolina was able to do towards the end of the season. And I think there's a lot of national media folks out there and we saw it, after the Clemson game. There are a lot of national media folks out there who thought that South Carolina should have had at least had a great case to be into the playoffs, if not should have been in the playoffs, but at least had a great case. And, the national media folks tend to fall in love with some players and some programs at times. And I think that's probably the case right now with South Carolina. And, I think that's a good thing, and I think you embrace it, but there's certainly going to be some expectations there. Obviously we all know that there's some holes to fill and some transfer portal recruiting to do to see if South Carolina can be one of those top 10 teams in the program, or one of those top 10 programs in the country going into next year. But, as we sit here in the first week of January, I mean, I can understand why that's a conversation. There's just a lot of time between now and September to figure out if that's real or not.
Preseason expectation, preseason rankings, and way too early lists and stuff like that mean less now than they ever have in the history of the sport.
Yeah.
You don't know who's going to be coaching.
You
You can
know.
playing. There's still another portal. You don't know any of this stuff.
Could be an opt out. I'm only play. There's going to be a contract where a kid only plays first and fourth quarter. Which, by the way, on the Nick Emmanwori thing, if you're going to sit out a half, dude, sit out the first. 90% of all bowl games, and anytime you play a team with a pulse, right? Sometimes it's over at halftime. Most of the time, the game's decided in the second half. If you want to miss a half, miss the first half, dude. Of course, I think Shane would have said, "You're not playing at all."
He would.
If that had been the case.
Well, I mean, I was right there, dude, watching that whole thing unfold. Whole thing.
What happened? Did Nick just come up to the coach and say, "I'm out"?
No. So he informed his position coach. And then that made its way to Shane Beamer, who walked down the sideline because Nick was standing on there with a football in his hand, just standing there. John, I don't know if you watched all this or not, but when I saw 31 run on the field, I thought, did Emmanwori get hurt? Because I missed that. And then Shane walked over, and their conversation was quite animated. Beamer's hands going up in the air multiple times, pointing towards the field. He walked away. He walked back. They finished their conversation, and that's when Emmanwori walked over, shook the hands of his teammates who were sitting on the bench, reached up, grabbed his helmet, and Derek Moore escorted him off the field with their arms around each other. He threw some gloves in the stands to a couple of kids, shook some hands, and he walked into the locker room. That's the last we ever saw of him.
Makes no sense.
So it was totally blindsiding to Shane Beamer. Totally. So it was
and I bet Nick regrets it.
If he doesn't now, he's going to, and it's I mean, that could be a whole show, that conversation. I'll try to be as concise as possible with my thoughts on it. Is to me, it's just like whether you think it's right or not, you have soiled your reputation with a sizable chunk of the fan base after 3 years of goodwill for a half of football. And, I understand that anybody can get hurt at any time, but, it's safety. You're usually delivering those hits that, are the ones that are hurting people. You're not usually the one who's getting hurt. And if you pull a hamstring or if you roll an ankle, like, you're going to be fine for the NFL draft. I don't understand why risking, why not playing about 25 or 30 plays in the second half. That, to me, that just doesn't line up. But, it's a decision he made, and it doesn't make sense to me. I said on a different show when we were talking about Cam Ward and sitting out, like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Is the best the best way to go about it would have been to just sit out the bowl game. But at least his coaches knew.
Yeah. I went off on the tailgate show about that. Remember, Phil? I felt like a horse's ass after it happened to Carolina. But I'll say this: if you'd have put a gun to my head and said, JC, a player is going to opt out at halftime of South Carolina's bowl game, and even if he hadn't said offense or defense, and he's going to be a significant player, I would have said Nick Emmanwori.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have gotten, I would have survived. And that's not, he's a good kid. He's a good guy. He's not a bad guy. But Nick there's a lot of players like this. Nick, it's Team Nick, right? It's Team Nick as part of the Gamecocks, right? And it's going to be Team Nick. And look, there's a lot of Hall of Famers that were Team Dion. This is the guy that if he's really good in the NFL, he's going to take you to the cleaners in free agency. He's going to put himself out there. There's always going to be a contract issue, and that's fine. There's plenty of great players that way. For it to happen to a college football team at halftime, the program in his hometown that gave him the shot at playing college football when nobody else wanted him, that's unfortunate, especially considering every demand he's had during the offseason since he's been at South Carolina has been met and then some. Yeah. All right. So it's not like Carolina gypped him on the NIL or anything. He's been one of the better, higher earners on this football team for a long, long time. Every offseason, you know? So I and there's just some players like that. I just think it's unfortunate now we're in a period of time where that's okay. Oh, he opted out at halftime. Great. No, that should never be praised and tolerated by anybody who cares about the sport at all.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to this conversation in a little while. I've got something else to add to it as well. But John,
let's talk about something more depressing.
Well, yeah, that's the basketball team. Let's get to this real quick. Carolina.
I take it you went to Starkville
this weekend in Starkville. I mentioned this morning, John, to Bill and Preston. Look, last year they beat Mississippi State to open the season, and then the next game, Alabama took them to the woodshed in Tuscaloosa, and then they had a shot at the buzzer to beat a terrible Missouri team. If Lamont Paris has shown anybody anything, his teams do have short memories and they're able to rebound. But the bigger question is this team good enough to do that in the best that the league has ever been? What did you see and what do you think?
Well, what I saw was awful. I want to choose my words carefully, but at the same time, like what I want to say, Lamont basically said, like the team didn't have fight.
Right.
They lost the fight, and I thought, and I've felt the whole year, like this team doesn't play with the same aggression and the same engagement and the same level of urgency. Forget play in, play out, but game by game, like there have been so many times this year where, South Carolina's just kind of been down or hung around with really bad teams. And they've just I'll say this about South Carolina sports in general. There have been very few times that I can recall, especially recently, where teams just don't look like they want to be there and play. You call yourself Fighting Gamecocks, right? And there seems to be great spirit regardless of how good or bad your team is. Not always, but usually. There have been very few teams. And this team, to me, right now, doesn't seem like they have that spirit to go out there and play hard every day. And, Nick Pringle after the game said, it starts with us in practice. We don't bring the consistency in practice. And I mean, that's damning to hear. And, I think that there are some, and this is an old team too. It's not like it's a young and immature group. Like Miles Studi has played 75 SEC games, like just SEC games, not college basketball games, SEC games. Nick Pringle's played a ton. Jacoby Wright has played a ton. Jamarii Thomas hadn't been in the SEC, but he's played a ton. There's no reason for these guys. This is not an immature team. And
right.
I just don't see there have been some great games. That Clemson game, I mean, they were up for it from the opening tip. Like that was one of the few games this year where they've started out great and played well basically throughout. But there's so many times where this team just finds themselves down or in a battle with Presbyterian. Like I'm sitting there, the Presbyterian game, I'm down in Orlando. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like what's happening here? We can keep looking for excuses. Oh, well, they were coming off of the Christmas break or they were coming out of the exam break. I forget what game that was, but coming out of the exam break, maybe Mercer didn't play great, or maybe it was East Carolina. Like it started in the preseason game against Worcester when Worcester gave them a battle for a long time. And then it was the opener against North Florida when they came out and played poorly and didn't play well and played without hustle and fight for most of that game and lost. Like this has been a constant theme about this team throughout the year. And to answer the second part of your question, do I think that this team can be good enough in the SEC not to compete like they did last year in terms of for a title or a SEC tournament bye or whatever, but there's a lot of meat left on the bone for this team in terms of how good it can be. Like, they're not playing anywhere near their potential. Like,
Right.
when I look at this roster, and I know I'm going on and haven't let y'all talk, but when I look at this roster and how they've played so far this year, there's probably one guy, Morris Ugasuk, I think that's how we pronounce his name now, who has either met or surpassed expectations. Like, there's nobody else who has played up to their capability from consistently. Like, Collin Murray-Boyles has at times, and Nick Pringle has at times. Jamarii Thomas, not even close. Zach Davis, not even close. Miles Studi, not even close. Jacoby Wright, not even close. None of these guys are playing anywhere near their capability. And I'm not even talking about like making a jump from last season. Like, they're not even playing to where they were last year. And, that's damning too. And, I talked on this show basically every time we talked about basketball, about how valuable Talon Cooper was and how he was a straw stirring the drink for the Gamecocks. And that was a pretty sturdy branch I was inching out on, I know. But what's happened so far this year just makes that point even more, that how valuable he was to this team, because he didn't put up with shit. He would get after you. He kept that team together. He kept that team focused. He kept that team doing the right things. He set the tone on the court and off the court. And they're missing that this year. And I don't know that they're going to be able to find that. I hope they can, because they're so much more talented than how they've played. And, people are talking on the Big Spur message boards about how this team isn't anywhere good enough and they're not athletic enough and this, that, and the other. And, they certainly don't look like it. I based on what we've seen on the court this year, I've got to agree with them. But I know that all of these guys individually are better. And all of these guys as a team are so much better than what they've played. But, there's 17 SEC games left, but you've already played a bunch of games too, and you haven't looked very often like you wanted to be out there and play hard for 40 minutes. We'll see if they can flip the switch and go after it and get after it over these next games. But losing by 35 to Mississippi State, it gets harder. That one, but it gets harder.
Yeah, to your point, a pair of top 5 matchups are ahead here, both at home, Wednesday night and Saturday afternoon. Number 5 Alabama first. Auburn Tigers, ranked second in the country, will enter on Saturday.
I'm James Carvell from Old School. After that, I couldn't have said it any better.
Yeah, that was very well said. There's no doubt.
Rebuttal.
John, we'll try to we will mix in some baseball next week, but we're out of time. But Happy New Year, man. It's good to spend another year with you. It's always a delight to have you on Mondays. You make us better. No doubt about that. Hopefully you can cover an upset Wednesday evening.
That'd be fun. Or Saturday. I mean, you win one of these next 2 games, you start feeling pretty damn good about yourself. Yeah. So that'd be big, but it's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough. 2 really good teams, no question. Thanks, John.
I appreciate you guys.